heart of the English countryside, surrounded by acres of lush gardens and rolling hills, stood Ashworth Hall, a sprawling estate that had been the pride of the Ashworth family for generations. Its Crimson Conservatory, with its glass walls and exotic plants, was a place of beauty and tranquility. But for Lady Margaret Ashworth, the mistress of the estate, the conservatory was more than just a sanctuary. It was a stage where secrets bloomed like the rarest of flowers, and love was a dangerous game played in the shadows. Margaret Ashworth was the epitome of English elegance. With her porcelain skin and fiery red hair, she was the jewel of the countryside. Her husband, Lord Edward Ashworth, was a respected diplomat, a man who had dedicated his life to serving his country. Together, they were the golden couple of Ashworth Hall, their lives a whirlwind of garden parties, hunting expeditions, and diplomatic dinners. But beneath the surface of their perfect life, cracks were beginning to show. Edward was rarely home, his days consumed by meetings and international trips. When he was home, he was distant, his mind always elsewhere. Margaret tried to fill the void with her own pursuits, but the emptiness in her heart only grew. One evening, as she wandered the halls of Ashworth Hall, she found herself drawn to the Crimson Conservatory. The room was bathed in the soft glow of the moonlight, the glass walls reflecting the stars above. But as she stepped inside, she noticed something unusual. A pair of gloves lay on the wrought iron bench, their leather worn and familiar. Margaret picked them up, her heart skipping a beat. They were Edward's gloves, the ones he always wore when riding. But why were they here, in her conservatory? A flicker of doubt crept into her mind, a tiny crack in the foundation of her perfect life. Days turned into weeks, and Margaret's suspicions grew. She began to notice small things: a missed call on Edward's phone, a receipt for a hotel room in Paris, a lingering scent of perfume on his collar. One night, as they sat at the dinner table, she decided to confront him. "Edward," she said, her voice steady but cold, "is there something you're not telling me?" He looked up from his plate, his expression unreadable. "What are you talking about?" "I found your gloves in the conservatory," she said. "What were you doing there?" Edward's face darkened. "I was checking on the plants," he said. "You know how important they are to the estate." But Margaret wasn't convinced. The way he had spoken, the urgency in his voice, it didn't sound like a simple explanation. That night, as she lay in bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The conservatory, once her sanctuary, now felt like a place of secrets, a beautiful, shadowed prison where the truth was just out of reach. Margaret's suspicions led her to hire a private investigator. She needed answers, no matter the cost. A week later, the investigator delivered his report. Margaret sat in her study, her hands trembling as she opened the envelope. The photos inside made her blood run cold. There was Edward, standing outside a luxury hotel in Paris. And there, beside him, was a woman, a beautiful, younger woman with long blonde hair and a radiant smile. Margaret's heart shattered as she read the investigator's notes. The woman's name was Celeste, and she was Edward's mistress. They had been seeing each other for over a year, and Edward had even bought her an apartment in the city. The conservatory, once a symbol of their love, now felt like a cruel joke, a beautiful, shadowed prison where Margaret was trapped, while Edward lived a double life. Margaret waited until Edward returned home from his latest trip. She sat in the conservatory, the photos spread out on the wrought iron table, her heart pounding in her chest. When Edward walked in, he froze at the sight of the photos. "Margaret," he said, his voice trembling. "I can explain." "Don't," she interrupted, her eyes blazing with anger. "Just tell me the truth." For a moment, there was silence. Then Edward sighed and sat down, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "Celeste is someone I met at a conference. It started as a friendship, but It turned into something more. I never meant to hurt you. Margaret felt like the ground had been ripped out from under her. The conservatory, once her sanctuary, now felt like a prison, a beautiful, shadowed prison where her heartbreak was on display for the world to see. Margaret stood at the edge of the conservatory, the moonlight streaming through the glass walls, casting a soft glow over the exotic plants. The wind tugged at her hair, the scent of the flowers filling her lungs. She felt numb, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. Edward had begged for forgiveness, had promised to end things with Celeste. But Margaret wasn't sure if she could trust him again. The conservatory, once a symbol of their love, now felt like a barrier, a reminder of how easily secrets could hide in plain sight. As the stars twinkled above, Margaret made a decision. She would stay, for now. But the cracks in their marriage were too deep to ignore, and she knew that one day the conservatory would shatter completely, and when it did, she would be ready. Love, like a rare flower, is both beautiful and fragile. It can bloom brightly, but it can also wither under pressure. Margaret and Edward's story is a reminder that even the most perfect conservatories can hide the deepest secrets. What would you do if your love was a Crimson Conservatory? Would you stay, or would you walk away? This is the Crimson Conservatory. But the ending is still unwritten.
Like, follow, subscribe. Check out our channel for more stories.